to the Belonging Project, today global conversation. The Belonging Project has the purpose to share the real-life, powerful conversation that offer inspirational and practical strategies to anyone who is in the path to find their true voice in society and as a leader. The journey towards belonging. This conversation is exactly what is needed to be at this moment in time. We've asked our guests to join us via video to allow us to create a deeper and authentic connection. Our rules. Nobody gets to be wrong or right. Emotions are always welcome. Come as you are. Everything is included. Lastly, everybody gets to be vulnerable. We love talking about wins and success, but we love talking about challenges and failures even more.
And our guest today is Kristen Lisanti. Kristen is BCW's Chief Culture Officer, and as part of her current role, she focuses on establishing a healthy, thriving culture across BCW's global business. Kristen has developed an innovative approach to building a culture that is personal, relational, operational, and it's fusing strategies from organization design, leadership development, and change management, and also with applied neuroscience, developmental psychology, and mindfulness meditation. I cannot wait to know more about that. And previously from that role, Kristen has served in a head of talent role at Vision 7 International, where she was driving organizational change initiatives, such as prioritizing culture integration in the M&A process. And before shifting to a focus on organizational change, Kristen has spent the first 15 years of her career driving social and behavioral change through communications. And Kristen's interests and work do not stop here. She has also directed many public education campaigns on various topics, such as mental health awareness and mental illness stigma reduction, and also much more. Kristen is also a certified coach through the Neuro Leadership Institute and a certified mindfulness meditation teacher through the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. And finally, she's also a trustee on the board of her town's Community Coalition on Race, supporting community engagement and anti-racism initiatives. Kristen, thank you so much for being our guest today. We couldn't be more thrilled to have you. And wow, we are feeling so much inspiration from your career. There are a few big and important things that are already coming up for me around the importance of culture, change, mental health, innovation as well. Belonging is our big theme for today, as you know. But before we get into that, we'd love to know about your story in your own words, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, you've summed it up beautifully. Those are the milestones, I suppose. My work, as you mentioned up front, Fiorenza is really a mashup of all of the different interests that I have and all of the different experiences that I've had. So I did start out in the marketing communications industry. I'm still there. BCW is an integrated marketing communications firm. And but I've moved to the operational side of the business. And I love working in the agency world because it's very challenging environment to work in. And I think that that yields a lot of growth potential and opportunity. And it's an industry that is changing constantly. So that is kind of ripe, fertile soil for a coach to work in helping people level up in all sorts of ways, not only in terms of upskilling, but in terms of really growing as people and as leaders through the work that they're doing with their clients and in communications to audiences around the world. So yeah, I bring together the mindfulness practice that's been so foundational in my own life and in my own leadership, with which is completely based in neuroscience. So the way that I was trained at UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center is based in what we know about the brain and how the brain works and how it interacts with the world around it. And then my coaching training was also with the Neuro Leadership Institute, which is all about how we use what we know about the brain and apply those lessons and those insights to how we lead teams and businesses. So I think in terms of my story, it's been a story of getting clear about what I had to offer. And I guess when I say getting clear, I don't mean having it all figured out by any stretch, but just getting clear about, what really felt like it was, my wheelhouse and my unique strengths, and just leaning into every opportunity to develop those, and then pulling together the parts that seemed to fit those strengths and the disciplines that seemed to inform them, and offering kind of a unique cocktail of management consulting plus neuroscience plus mindfulness. Shake it up and serve it on the rocks, and that's essentially what I do.
Sounds delicious. I'm curious to know, and thank you for sharing all of these cocktails. Cocktail look amazing as you are. I'm curious, what drove you to mindfulness, this curiosity to neuroscience with this piece of mindfulness that you brought to your cocktail?
I think 20 years ago, the word mindfulness would have done nothing for me. I would have been turned off by it. And it was only when I was in a period of about, it was about a little over 15 years ago, I was going through stuff in my personal life. I was, in a rut professionally. I had been promoted and successful but kind of operating on autopilot. And I hadn't really asked myself any questions about what was this for, what was important to me, what did I want to actually be doing. I just kind of fallen into a track, and I had accelerated on that track. And it was actually a therapist who, because I kind of had an existential crisis, like, who am I, what am I doing here? Around the time I was turning 30. And my therapist, after a while of counseling — I love therapy, I'm a huge fan of it, I recommend it to everyone. She said to me, I think therapy is helping you, but I think what you really need to do is develop some kind of personal practice for working with your thoughts and working with your internal narratives. And so she directed me to a mindfulness course that was being offered nearby. And I went and took this, 8-week course. And I came back to her and I said, you know what, I think that this is really something, and there's really something in this for me. And I'm starting to have some new insights about what are some of those old ruts, old patterns of thinking, old stories that I've gotten stuck in. This was really the right time. Thank you so much for bringing it to me. And she said, I've been telling you that you should do this since you walked through my door. And it was only a year later that you were able to hear it. Right. So I think that there were probably lots of signs that I needed to do some digging, but you're just not ready until you're ready.
Absolutely.
But it was a need. I had to be in need in order to open myself up to something like mindfulness in the first place. And I found it to be very practical, very pragmatic way of approaching life. And I think it has still has, it's gone pretty mainstream at this point, but I think that there's still a lot of misconception around mindfulness being a mystical thing or something that is, new agey or hippie granola stuff. It's just, it's just the opposite of mindlessness. That's all it is. It's just paying attention to what we're paying attention to. It's no more technical or special than that. It's really quite simple. But the practice of it is very challenging and incredibly rewarding.
And thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kristen. And what you've mentioned there about, mindfulness is mainstream in a way, but also still it keeps some aspects of, mystical for some people. And in the workplace, especially, you may find some people that, see it that way, or just something that isn't quite fit for the workplace. And yeah, I'm super curious in terms of how is that working for you, in that cocktail that you were talking about with Andrea, and integrating mindfulness into that. What has been the perception, the reaction to it?
I think this is where the other parts of the cocktail come into play, right? Having the data, having the science, having the support of, all of the wealth of information and research that's being published around things like emotional intelligence and resilience. Mindfulness supports all of that. In fact, it's the only modality that I've found that actually supports our ability to be more flexible thinkers, more open to the opportunity that is around us, and have that opportunity awareness, to be creative and innovative in our solutions, to be more inclusive leaders. We're going to be talking about belonging today. Science tells us that mindfulness practice contributes to our ability to be less biased, less reactive, and more inclusive collaborators with one another, particularly across our differences. So pointing to some of the research helps, but there is no substitute for direct experience. I mean, really, that is where people start to see, oh, okay, this is something actually that I've been missing, or that I need, or that's going to help me get to the next level in terms of my leadership impact. And then, of course, there's the stress management component. I don't approach mindfulness from a wellness perspective for all sorts of reasons. I find it ethically problematic to bring mindfulness into a toxic workplace, or a business that grinds its people down, but it has yoga on Thursdays, right? Like, that's like applying a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. We can't do that, right? We need to be applying mindfulness in an organizational context to drive change, right? So everybody who engages with the mindfulness leadership program that we have at BCW, which we call Leading Above the Line, everyone who goes through that program, yes, they are engaging in a daily mindfulness practice that they're taking on, starting at 5 minutes a day. It's very introductory, so open to beginners. You have to have no experience, is perfectly fine. But they're also learning to apply that practice and that increased awareness, not only to managing their own stress and their own emotional reactivity, but to apply it in relationships with other people. How are we navigating conflicts together? How are we staying open to opportunities? How are we looking for and mitigating the bias and the injustice that exists within any organizational framework, and addressing those problems eyes wide open, right? And really looking for the creative solutions that are going to yield meaningful change. So everything we do is about applied mindfulness. And I think that very early on in taking on a practice like this, you start to see personal impact, and the people around you start to see you showing up in a different way. And that's when people say, oh, wait, there's something to this. What is this about? What's going on here? And it's about your brain changing. It's about quieting the amygdala, the reactive center of your brain, and giving your prefrontal cortex, which is where all your higher order strategic decision-making and relational decision-making consciously happens, giving that prefrontal cortex more space to do its thing. Really, that's what's happening in the brain on a neural level. So the impact in terms of business is significant if you give yourself the space to let it work.
That's fascinating. Wow, thank you for sharing this. And with your personal experience that when you approach with your therapist and even the work that you are doing right now in the organization, in the cultural change in the organization, applying mindfulness. And coming to the topic of our call here, what all of this experience comes to your mind when you think about belonging?
When I think about belonging, I don't know if you've gotten this answer before, but I think of organizational accountability when I think of belonging. We can't place the burden of belonging on the individual. Wow. Right? We need in any group setting, whether it's a community or an organization or a team, we need to make sure that the organization is prioritizing creating an environment where people feel that they can belong. So in my culture work, we often use the ecosystem model or metaphor, right? So imagine a coral reef, for example, where leaders of a team are responsible for creating the conditions of that reef, right? They set the conditions that allow every member to show up as themselves, to offer their unique contribution to the ecosystem, and to be recognized and rewarded for doing that, for making that contribution. That's how I think about belonging. Are we setting the conditions for everyone to be able to come in and be exactly who they are, right? Whether they're an anemone or a clownfish or a piece of coral or whatever it is that they're contributing, that the ecosystem needs all of us, but it needs all of us to be ourselves. Yeah. But the responsibility for creating the conditions that are safe and challenging enough for that to be true lie with the organizational leaders themselves.
Yeah, that really, really resonates. Could you tell us about the first time where you felt that you belonged or that maybe you didn't belong?
Well, I think it's important to start by recognizing that my privilege as a white, straight, cisgender person from a middle-class background allows me to belong in most places in the world. I've never known what it's like to be the only person like me in the room. So belonging for me is really about, I had instances in my life kind of more less pernicious than the institutional lack of belonging that so many experience. I was bullied as a kid and in all the boring ways that many kids are. I've always, as an adult, I've been exceedingly independent as a person, as a professional. I kind of stand on my own. And that's probably because in my work, I'm a change agent, right? What I do is I come into organizations and I help them change, which means that I am by nature not going to fit existing paradigms. That's just the way it is in my line of work. And I think if you're doing anything interesting, that's probably what it's going to be like for you too, simply by virtue of what you're trying to do. So in terms of my own experience with belonging throughout my life and in my work, it's critically important for me to find those people who understand what I'm trying to do. And usually they're trying to do the same. And we stick together, right? And we find belonging with one another in terms of communities that are working toward change. That's where I feel I belong. It has much less to do with our backgrounds, how we look, how we think, and it's much more about kind of mission alignment, right? What are we here to do together? That's where the work actually gets done.
What, for you, Kristen, what are the factors that are important in the picture to feel like you belong?
The first factor for me is if I can show up and be myself, right? And do the work in the ways that make sense to me. So there's a quality of autonomy, right, that allows me to feel like I belong. If no one is micromanaging me, if no one is telling me how to do every little thing, I will feel like I have the space to move in the ways that are natural for me and that are most effective for me. It's very important that I feel connected. And I think that most people feel connected to some mission of whatever group or organization that they're a part of. What is the purpose of this group? What is the challenge that they're taking on? I think that sense of purpose is really important for us in terms of generating belonging among a team. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an altruistic purpose in terms of making the world a better place, but what is your team oriented toward? What are you trying to accomplish together? What is success going to look like, right? Having a galvanizing mission that's going to that take the whole group forward. And then finally, I need to be growing. I need to be growing. If I'm not growing, it means some aspect of that safety to be myself, or some aspect of that challenge is off. And it's not a place I want to be. Every job I've ever left, it has been because I had stopped growing there. And I always tell colleagues and my coaching clients, when you have stopped growing somewhere, it is time to go. And either you will make that decision or the organization will make that decision. But that's okay. Go and grow somewhere else, right? That's what we're here to do. So those are the big three for me. Yeah.
Really resonates with knowing when we got to the end of a growth journey at a company, or in a place, and I feel that sometimes it can take courage to recognize that, because we may feel comfortable, or we love the place, we love the environment. And I'm curious in terms of whether you see any different factors coming into the picture, of belonging when it's in the personal sphere.
No. I think we need the same things everywhere we go in the world. A big part of my work is focused around helping organizations remember that their people are human beings, and they don't stop being human beings when they come into the organization. So I think we have those same needs. I think that in our relationships, whether it's a marriage or a friendship or a community that we're a part of, I think we have these kind of fundamental needs to feel like we can be ourselves, and we can do things in ways that are natural to us, that we are connected to one another in terms of, maybe in a personal life, it's more about values or beliefs than it is about mission. But I don't know, I would challenge that too. I think it's possible to have different values, different political perspectives, different core beliefs from people, and still be in relationship to them, and still be able to respect that within reason, certainly. But then I also think that growth is still an important part of our personal relationships as well. Part of the reason I'm not on Facebook anymore, sorry, Facebook, is that, I think that whole model, for example, is all about the idea that like you're supposed to hang on to all of your relationships throughout your life, right? Like when I was on Facebook, a good portion of my feed was people I went to high school with, but those relationships are not growing me anymore, right? And I wasn't contributing to their growth. It was all very much of a different time in my life. And I believe we're supposed to shed those relationships, and we're supposed to enter into new spheres that challenge us in different ways. So yeah, I think even when it relates to the personal life, I think that we need the very same things.
And then again, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to shed those relationships and spheres and move on to new ones.
It's true. And it does involve, you mentioned just a moment ago, the idea of comfort, right? We can become very comfortable.
Yes.
And that means that, we are not seeing the ways in which our comfort might in fact be to our detriment, right? Holding us back, in fact, from what's out there. So that's, again, just bring it back to mindfulness and the brain. Being able to see the ways in which our brain is designed and wired to keep us safe, right? That's the whole purpose of many of our brain's functions, is to keep us squarely in our safety zones to help us survive, right? So mindfulness practice, in terms of growth and transformation, which is how we apply it at BCW, is about recognizing, oh, okay, this thought or this impulse or this behavior of mine is actually holding me back, rather than allowing me to step into what is, yes, maybe a little scary, maybe a little uncertain or ambiguous, but these days, what isn't, right? We need to be able to develop I'm not going to use the word confidence, because it's not always going to feel like confidence. Some days confidence is just too much to ask for, but we need to develop the wherewithal and the kind of trust in ourselves, right? That we can handle it, that we will be able to, even if we make a misstep, even if we fail at something, we'll be able to learn from it and fail forward. So developing that sense of trust within ourselves to be able to take those steps forward. I think it requires courage, but you're not always going to feel courageous. You're not always going to feel confident. And you should take those steps anyway, because you can do this.
It reminds me the Brené Brown quote that she says, integrity is choosing courage over comfort, is choosing what is right over what's fun, fast, and easy. So it's sometimes it's not good, it's not easy, but you need to choose what is, be courageous, is choose what is right for you at that moment. Even saying no, like saying no to groups, saying no to Facebook, or in order to expand, to grow.
I love that, Andrea. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think that, and it begins with really a strong sense of self-awareness. This leadership development program I mentioned a moment ago, we spend the first it's a 12-week program. It takes a quarter that you go through, and you're developing this mindfulness practice all along the way. And the first 6 weeks of the program are about the leader.
Yeah.
And some of my leaders will say to me, but why? I thought this was a leadership program. I'm supposed to be learning about how to lead other people. But we have to start with ourselves. If we're not starting with a strong foundation of self-awareness, forget it. You're not leading anybody anywhere, because you don't know what's going on within you. You're not seeing the ways that your stress is leaking out onto everyone around you. You're not seeing the ways that your biases are actually informing your decision-making in really problematic ways, right? So we have to spend that time with ourselves so that we know what's right, to your point and to Brené's point, right? We have to develop a sense of ourselves so that we know what integrity means to us.
Exactly. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah. And awareness feels always like a difficult step, building that awareness, building that, just knowledge of ourselves, but in a deep way, really in a inner work way. And that, again, may not feel comfortable. Especially when you expect
know this as coaches, right? You really have to be up for it. And that's the thing about, this program, mindfulness practices, coaching in general. These growth opportunities are there for you, but you really have to be ready for it. And if you think you're just going to kind of show up and you're going to see some PowerPoint slides and it's going to tell you how to be a better leader and that's going to change your life, forget it. That's not how it works. You have to put in the work, and it means facing ourselves, particularly if you're doing it through a self-awareness practice like mindfulness, where you sit down to practice mindfulness meditation. The first thing you run into is your own neuroses, right? All your own stories, your anxieties, your inner critic, all of that. And through the practice, we teach people how to navigate that very chaotic inner terrain. Everybody thinks it's just them. So we do a lot of normalizing around, it's not just you. My head sounds like that. Your head sounds like that. His head sounds like that. But none of us are open about that. So doing this learning and this work in community together is so important, because people realize, oh, it's not just me. I'm not broken.
Yeah.
I am in good company, and I'm in a supportive environment. Again, going back to that sense of belonging and that ability to feel safe and supported for being exactly who you are. That's how people grow. So that's one of the key elements of the ecosystem we're creating at BCW, is this sense of, we know you're not perfect. We know you're in progress. That's the point, right? So come and do the work here and be supported. Take on this challenge. It's a massive challenge, but you're in a safe space to do it. And your potential is limitless if you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. The power of community in that experience of practice. I've seen it as well in mindfulness courses that I've facilitated one-on-one versus in group settings. And in the one-to-one, you have the person sharing similar thoughts and experiences, but then it's just you, and you are in that facilitator role. You're not experiencing it at the same time. And I did feel that when the people were in a group setting within a community, hearing it from others just had so much more impact, almost like just taking off a weight.
If we look at the origins of mindfulness meditation, there are many different faith traditions that include contemplative practices, of course, but mindfulness meditation comes directly from the Buddhist tradition. And in that tradition, there are what are called the three jewels. So there's the Buddha, which is you, the practitioner, the Dharma, which is the teachings or the practice. And then the third is the community, or what's called the Sangha. And it's so important that it's up there on par, equally as important as you and the practice is your community, is your support community. And I see that every day in my work. Our leaders learn every bit as much from one another as they do from me, without a doubt. And they don't believe me at the beginning of the program when I tell them, but at the end, they are each other's teachers. And the connections that they've made continue on well after the program is concluded. We've got a really strong alumni network that is staying connected to one another and supporting one another. And these are executives, right? These are global executives. These are senior client-facing leaders, practice leaders, people who have very real-world jobs and who are finding this practice and this inner work, as you say, supportive in their own exceeding of their own expectations and showing up as the leaders that they were always meant to be, and but in some ways, even unbeknownst to themselves, have been holding themselves back.
Let's go to our quick questions.
In a few words, belonging for me is?
Belonging for me is, okay, in the model of the ecosystem, it's the temperature of the water.
The best advice that I received and that I'd like to share with others is? Best advice I ever received was, not everyone's going to like you.
And Cynthia, if you're watching this, thank you for that. But I will add on to it that this is especially true if you are doing change work, if you are doing interesting work, if you are innovating. Just if people are resisting it, take it as a sign that you are pushing them in a way that is meaningful and important. With sensitivity, of course, but don't take their resistance as a sign that you're not being effective. Their resistance is a sign that you are being effective. And their comfort zone is what you're working against, not them, but the comfort zone. So don't take it personal. That's just the work.
It's almost like the more people actually don't like you, the best your work is.
The more they resist, probably the higher order of change you're asking them to engage with, right? So it's like we always talk about, if you get a no, you have to just listen to the nuances of that no to know how to go back at it, right? From a different angle, with a little bit of a fuller perspective, with greater sensitivity as to where those concerns are. And then, yeah, eventually people will come around. But again, only when they're ready. Yeah. Only when they're ready. You can't take that personally for yourself.
All right, last question. The world would be a better place if?
I'm going to bring it back to mindfulness for this one, just to bring it full circle. I think the world would be a better place if we can learn to distinguish our stories that live up here from reality that is around us. So our stories are telling us that we are separate from one another, that we are in competition with one another, that we will be happy when we have enough, which is a myth. Enough doesn't exist, right? That success means having control. If we can just have more control, if we can just get people to do what we want them to do, then we'll be successful, we'll achieve all our goals. The reality is none of those things. That those are stories, those are programming, right? That we're carrying, that we've inherited, we've learned them. But the reality of this world, the reality of our work is that we are all connected to one another. We are all members of this ecosystem together. Everything changes always, right? People come and go. Things are always shifting. The world is volatile right now. Guess what? It's going to be volatile 5 years from now for totally different reasons, right? Everything comes and goes. The only thing we can control is how we show up. Yeah. That's the reality. So if we can, I guess my mission in life is to help people distinguish between that story and reality and apply that insight in their lives and in their work.
Wow, Kristen, wow. I could be here forever talk with you. Such a rich conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure. What an absolute pleasure.
What a pleasure to have you. Thank you for believing our project. It's really about bringing voices together, let people, I love what you said in the beginning, the sense that the community, that we are not alone,